Yeah, what's up internet, Since Media here, and this is the second video I'm going to be talking about GoldenPond, which is my library for creating chord progressions. I talked about the basic principles in the first video and gave you an example. I'm going to zoom in on a slightly more complicated chord progression today, mainly to show some of the extra features that we didn't cover in the last video. So here is a chord progression I've been playing around with for the last half an hour, 3/4 of an hour or so. So I'm now going to keep this running, but I'm going to pull up GoldenPond and we're going to talk through how this sequence is constructed. You'll notice that there is this little silent button here if we need to just take all the things out, all the chords out. But because this is a modal dialogue, by definition, that's how it works with these piano roll scripts in FL Studio. Unfortunately, it would be nice to kind of play this almost interactively by switching things on and off, but it's not as easy as that. Anyway, so I've split the kind of chord sequence up into like 4 parts, you could say. There's sort of 4 bars or 4 things of 4 here. So let's just look at those chords again. I'm going to take out the Euclidean, so we'll keep it a bit simpler. The first 4 chords. Okay, so initially we've just got the first chord. We are in the key of F major. Okay, that root number 53 is F. Major key is set here. We're just starting off on the 1, but we're playing the 7th of it. Then we go to the 4 chord. So this is pretty standard. We're not playing the 7th of the 4 chord, as you can see here. It's just 3 notes there. Then we do something, our first slightly more unorthodox thing. We go to the 3 chord, but you'll see this minus in front of that is borrowing. It's what I'm calling at the moment the modal interchange, but what we're actually doing is borrowing from the parallel minor, or rather in this case, because we're in a major key, when you see a minus sign in front of a number, that means borrow from the parallel minor key. So the parallel minor is the key that starts on the same note. So if we're in C major, the parallel minor is C minor. Okay, that's not the same as the relative minor, which is the minor that has all the same notes as the major. We have different notes at this point, which is why when you hear going into that chord, it's a little bit of a shock to the system. Just a little bit more of a buzz to it because we're borrowing it from that thing. Now we then go back to the 4, but this time we do actually play the 7th chord on the 4. So 2, 3. So there's this extra note up the top there. So that's our first sort of block of 4 chords. Now the second, we could now go to the 3 chord, but we're playing the 7th to the 3. Now we're not going into a parallel minor, we're just using the major version, or the chord from the major key here. We now go up to the 6. We now go up to the 7th chord on the 6. So that's just kind of adding this extension to the top. So we haven't moved very much at that point. You can see it here. This is this 6 chord, and the 6 with the 7th on the top, and then down to the 5. So far that's pretty conventional, apart from using this this parallel minor chord here. Now we start to see another piece of notation. It's an important notation here. You see this less than sign or angle bracket with a 5. That means we are now changing key from here on out. We're going down 5 semitones. Now we're in the key of F major at the moment, so F is here. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. So F is here. We're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. So we're going down to C major at this point. So we've been all the way through to this part here. Has all been in. Sorry. All of this has been in F major. At this point, we're going to jump down to C major. Right, but we do something more exotic at this point. So if you've seen my earlier videos, I discussed this principle before. This is what we call the secondary dominant. Now, what is the secondary dominant? Well, so the dominant is the 5 chord, and in our sort of conventions of Western music, there is this strong sense that the 5 chord wants to go home to the 1 chord, right? The dominant wants to go to the tonic. It is a convention, and yet anyone who hears it, you know, or most of us who hear it, you know. It feels very compelling way to go. The dominant is a bit unstable, the tonic is very stable. When you're on a 5 and you go to the 1, it feels very satisfying. So you can use that trick, or you can use this as a trick to make some other parts of your chord progression kind of more, have a little bit of that flavour of that thing. And the way you do that is you'd say, okay, I want to go to a different chord. Let's suppose I'm trying to go to the 3 chord in my current key. Well, what I could do is I could say, imagine my 3 chord was actually the tonic of a new key, right? So let's say I'm in the key of C, my 3 chord is on E, and let's now imagine us going temporarily into that key of E major, finding what the 5 chord is there, and then playing that before we play this chord that's the 3 chord in my current key. So we temporarily move out of the key we're in just to take the dominant of the key where we'd like to. So we want to go to the 3. We temporarily move to a different key in which the 3 chord is our tonic. We find the dominant chord there, and then we play that first on our way to the 3. Now that sounds very complicated. Normally, if you're going to compose with it, it's a certain amount of calculation. Now, what GoldenPond does is it makes it extremely easy to say that. In fact, all you have to say is, as you'll see me highlighting here, you put parentheses and you say 5/3. Now that is telling it exactly that we want the 5 chord in the key which our current 3 chord is the tonic. Now, it composes the same way that some of the others do. So if you put a 7 on the front of that, you'll get the 7th version of that, the 7th of the 5 chord in that. So in our case, we are in F, we're down in C major at this point because we've already gone from F down to C major here. And we now say, okay, what's the 3 chord in C major? Well, the 3 chord in C major is indeed this E. Assume we've temporarily gone now into the key of E major. What's the 5 chord there? Find out whatever that is. Now, we don't have to do the calculation. We're just telling it that's what we want to do. Play the 7 to that. Typically, we're going to do that before then moving on to play the 3 chord as it in our current key. So that's going to make this move here. Firstly, when we get to here, it's going to sound slightly surprising because we've moved out of our initial key. But then when it comes back to this chord, it's going to sound very satisfying because now we've got that 5-to-1 movement, which always sounds kind of good. It sounds kind of homecoming. Now, in this sequence, we then just play the same game again. We now go to our 2 chord, but before we play our 2 chord, we do the same thing. We find the secondary dominant of the 2 by saying, open bracket, 5 over 2. The only thing we do slightly surprising again is we borrow the 2 from the parallel minor as well. Then we finally go and play the 5 chord in our current thing, and then we're now going to suddenly shift back to our we're going to go back up 5 semitones back to our F major, and we're going to play the 1 chord. And okay, so there was a bit of a, I'm not sure there's any principle here, but a bit of experimentation. This 7/5 here in this key up to the 7/1 here, again it's a slightly strange, but it's quite smooth. Then I do, for the turnaround, a couple of other slightly surprising things here. I just borrow the 4 and the 5 from the parallel minor again, just so I had a bit of spice there. But in fact, we're going from the 5 as we come round to the 1 again. So with all that in mind, let's just now listen to the whole thing. Right, so we're in this bit here, up to the 6, the 7th to the 6, and then to the 5. Now we change key and play the secondary dominant of this. Duh. Secondary dominant again to the 2 chord, but the minor 2 chord, up to the 5 chord, back into the F major, and then these minor borrowings here, and back to the beginning. Let's hear it again. Secondary dominant. Chord. So I hope it's kind of fairly clear now that you can get quite a rich chord progressions, and this, although this looks a bit convoluted, it is not actually very complicated to work with. Now, as I say, if you were doing some of these moves by having to remember the notes yourself, you'll have to have achieved quite a level of sophistication as an instrument, in your instrument or as a theorist. But the real value, I think, of GoldenPond at this point is it just lets you play around with these numbers. You can just type some of these different numbers in, see how they sound. You can get a feel for these different maneuvers. We could, for example, decide to change these not to secondary dominants, but let's say we can take the 4 chord from these other keys, which we're tonicizing, right? So we're still going to our 3 chord at this point, but now we're going to say tonicize that 3 chords. In other words, pretend we're in the key of which that's the root, the tonic, and now play the 4 chord of that. So the 4 to the 1 is generally not quite as big and dramatic as the 5 to the 1, but it's still a very standard thing we do. You know, the 4 to the 1 chord certainly has a movement that feels quite satisfying. Here we go. So here we go. Secondary fourth, right? Secondary second. Oh, sorry, secondary fourth of the 2 chords. Not quite as dramatically compelling as the 5 to the 1 there, but you know, again, these are all flavours you can experiment and find what works for you, right, and works for your music. So I think that's covering most of what I want to show you of the GoldenPond chord language at this point. Just 2 other features briefly I'll show you. I didn't talk about this stutter. Like I say, this is not really something you can play live, unfortunately, although I've kind of tried to add a little bit of the ability to play around, and you can just about do certain passages of live music in some cases with it. It's still limited, and I say the main problem here is that in our scripts in the piano roll, you can't be playing with the other controls in FL Studio, unfortunately, while this dialogue is open. But what we can do is this. If I pull this stutter up for 1, we're basically just repeating the first chord in the progression. Pull it up to 2, and now we're just switching backwards and forwards between that 1 and the 2, the first and second chord in our progression. Or maybe let's go 1, 2, 3. Maybe we want to hang around on just the first 4, so we're not doing the entire progression at this point, we're just playing the beginnings of the sequence. And I can go all the way up to all 16 chords at this point. Or I can pull it down to 0, which doesn't stutter it at all, it just plays the entire sequence. So that is where we are currently with GoldenPond. So we've covered that. The last thing I just wanted to show you is you might think, oh, how do I remember all these configurations I've set? Well, FL Studio has got something called the debugging log, which you can see here. And the purpose of the debugging log normally is where parts of it are reporting errors. Well, we can write to it from the script. So what I've done here is I just write to the script this changed message with all the parameters you need. So what's the root, what's the mode, 0 is major, 1 is minor, the chord sequence that you've come up with, which of the current versions of the voice are in play. So here we've got the Euclidean arpeggio, the top line and the chords, the division, which is the quarter, note proportion, chord length, and Euclidean. So here you have all the parameters you would need to get back to the current state of the chord progression you're generating. That's the best I could do in terms of finding a way to log that. But it's fine. You know, what I would typically do at this point is I would just grab that and then go somewhere here. Let's. I've done this earlier, but I'm going to do it here. Open up, say, a Fruity Notebook 2. Just paste that in, and then when I save this file, I've just got this information here in my project file for whenever I need to recreate it. So I think that's pretty much it for today. Thanks for watching again, and there are going to be a couple more. We're going to move away from FL Studio in the next video, I think. Well, I mean, we're going to cover the code. The code might take 1 or 2 videos because there's now some complexity to it. And I want to show this in a couple of other contexts as well. So although this is a tool for FL Studio, it is also a library which can be used in some other places. And so we're going to come to that in the next videos. So thanks for watching, and I am out.